Welcome back, friends. It's Wednesday, March 15th, and we're glad that you're back with Steve Autrey over here. You still Steve Autrey?
Last I checked.
And I'm still Paul Thompson, and we're still glad that you're here.
And you're probably we're still your pastor. So
yeah, we hope.
We hope.
Yeah,
we hope.
Well, thank you for giving us this time, and we want to begin this day as we continue our way through the Sermon on the Mount. We arrive at a part on prayer and fasting, and I jokingly told Rod, I said, Rod, you're going to have to take that because I don't know a thing about fasting, a little bit about prayer. So Rod is going to be preaching this coming Sunday, and we'll invite him into the conversation later in the week. But Steve's going to begin for us with some reading from N.T. Wright.
Yep, so from his N.T. Wright's translation of the New Testament. And I'm just going to read a couple verses here. This is Matthew 6, 7, and 8 about prayer. When you pray, don't pile up a jumbled heap of words. That's what the Gentiles do. They reckon that the more they say, the more likely they are to be heard. So don't be like them. See, your Father knows what you need before you ask Him.
Steve, growing up in the tradition I did, we would often have a church service, and somebody would call on Brother So-and-so to pray for us. And I could almost verbatim tell you what Brother So-and-so was going to pray.
Well, and that's one of those things that while some traditions say they have no liturgy, they have liturgy.
They have a liturgy.
They have forms and formulas that are just part of what people do. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you're right. It's that, and some people's critique of liturgy is that it's a jumbled heap of words that mean nothing, right? So the critique goes both ways.
Critique goes both ways. And so when Jesus is saying, don't heap up those empty phrases.
But before he gets there, he says, when you pray. He doesn't say if you pray or you get around. His expectation is that we will be a praying people.
So it was Jewish tradition in most places that there would be 3 times a day that you would pause to pray, and those would generally be in the morning, around midday, and then in the evening. And so it was a cultural thing, a traditional thing, that's when you prayed. And how you pray then from there, really, Jesus is addressing more about that.
Yeah, this idea, again, it ties into what we were talking about last week. It's not performative. You're not praying to be heard by people. You're praying to connect with God.
And I think for me, one of the things I've learned through the years about prayer, and feel wholly inadequate in that, is that prayer is probably less about asking than it is more about listening for what is it that God might be speaking to us.
And this is one of those things I've struggled with when Jesus says, your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. Mm-hmm. So why do I need to ask?
And I think that's a great thing to say. Why do we even go through the trouble to ask, except
it facilitates communication, mm-hmm. and it builds relationship. And and I think, as a father with 2 teenage daughters, if all they do is go through their life staring at their phones and they never talk to me,
not much relationship.
Not much relationship. Those times that we have, especially as they're getting older, where we actually talk with each other, are so amazingly important to me. When I have the opportunity to share some things with them, when I can listen to what they want to share with me, there's an intimacy. You don't get to intimacy without conversation, without communication, without a connection that's deeper than just, oh, you know what I want.
I go back to a couple of places in the scriptures where Jesus encounters, let's say, a blind man. And the guy's blind. Jesus sees that he's blind, and yet Jesus will ask him, well, what do you want me to do for you? Mm-hmm. Now, Jesus is Lord, and I'm not arguing about that, but if Jesus, what is it? Why are you asking a blind man what he wants? It's pretty obvious. But when you break the question down and you start to understand the intent of the question, all of us have needs, but we're not really always sure that we know even what would make my life better. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes you hear people who say, I just need more money. If I could just win the lottery, all of my problems would be solved. And I say that would be where your problems really begin.
If you won the lottery, I would be your biggest problem.
You'd be on my doorstep.
I'd be all the time. I'd be like, you'd have to move. I'd be like, Brother Paul, my best friend.
But the reality is we really don't have to worry about asking for the right things. I think prayer is not about, trying to get the right motivation or the right words to get God to do what we want God to do. It's much more about, God, would you help me understand what it is that you want from me?
Mm-hmm. And it's also an acknowledgement that the other is present, mm-hmm. right? That conversation that, like, I acknowledge you're in this world. I acknowledge you're in my life. What's one way to put it? I see you. Mm. That, like, and do I take time to see you? I recently heard someone in a sermon say that we've forgotten how to tell God stories. Not because God isn't acting, but that we've stopped seeing where God acts. Mm-hmm. And that's part of prayer. It's being in tune, attentive to what's going on. I don't know, I think we just so easily think we can move through the motions or just ignore it altogether because, well, God already knows what I need without taking the time to actually work on the relationship.
A few weeks ago in the 8:30 service, I did a type of prayer that I had heard and really believe it is something worthwhile. It's choosing a word, maybe a phrase, but it doesn't even have to be a word. It can even be a color. And spending your time in prayer, just repeating that word or repeating that phrase or even just seeing that color. Because oftentimes when we think about the reward that we want, the word that I chose to use that day was peace. There is no amount of money that is out there. There is no job, there is no situation that I can imagine that's going to bring peace, except living in relationship with God and Jesus Christ and recognizing that there is a level of trust that goes with that it really doesn't matter what circumstances come. I am going to be able to find a sense of God's presence in it, and that's going to be enough.
And all the other things that promise peace, like finance is usually it. I've had the privilege of being able to minister to people in lots of different socioeconomic situations. And the ones who have the most money are no better off than the ones who have the least money, at least from a terms of peace. Mm. Wealthy people have as much turmoil as poor people. It's a different type of turmoil. And again, I'm not celebrating the fact that people are poor. What I'm saying is we seek the wrong things.
I think in my experience, most of the people who are the most settled, who have that deep sense of peace and happiness and joy, haven't been the more wealthy types. They've been people with limited, modest means who are very comfortable with what they had and simply were grateful for what they had.
And when you come before God with what you have, you recognize, that's enough. Mm-hmm. That is who I am, and that's who God wants me to be, and that is, I'm loved as I am.
Right. And that might be the real sense of prayer that we might encourage you and us to pray for, that we recognize that both God is enough, and because of who God is, we are enough for God. He loves us as we are, and we are enough for God. Am I who I might wish I could be? Probably not. Never have been. No, don't know that I'll ever get there.
I keep wishing you'd get better too.
Yeah, I know it. But the idea that I am enough for God, you're enough for God, we're all enough for God is truly, that is the deepest sense of belonging that I think we can hope to find.
And that it's a eternal. Remember, Jesus has given us the practices of a kingdom that is an eternal kind of life that does that begins now and extends forever. So these are the values that persist and continue forever and ever and ever.
So, Steve, as we continue to walk through the Sermon on the Mount, we've covered a lot of ground. We've covered, almsgiving. We've covered about enemies, divorce, oaths, all of those different kinds of things. And here, prayer, and then tomorrow, fasting, gets really into this deep sense of how we live out the faith. May not be as important as what's the heart behind it. So we'll pick back up on that tomorrow, and we're grateful for your time.
Yeah, thank you.